All right. You ready? Here we go.
All right.
All right. Good evening. I'm Mike Michael, and this is
Chad Timish.
And today what we're going to do is a little bit of an action comparison. I know a lot of us have probably ad nauseum looked at the different specs and stuff to everything that's available on the market. So what we've got are quite a few different rifles here, and what we're going to do is look at the actions, and we will inevitably talk a little bit about the specs, but we're going to try to give our description of the subjective side on how the actions run and kind of our experiences that we've had with them. So a little bit about our shooting background and kind of our angle or perspective that we're going to talk about is both Chad and I, we do a lot of local matches for the KPRC, a couple PRS matches, NRL matches. So we're not really too focused on hunting, I would say. So more or less match rifles. Is
I'm focused on hunting, but
he's focused. Not me. So obviously most of the rifles we have that are geared towards match shooting. However, we do have a Remington 700 in a long action. We don't have a short action. And that's like trying to get a baseline, because most of the people that are going to be looking at this video probably have at least a rough idea or easy access to a Remington 700, but maybe not the other actions. So a couple of similarities between all the rifles that we have. They're all bolt action. We're not talking about anything about gas guns. Quite a few of them are on a Remington 700 footprint. We've got one Savage and one Desert Tech, which a little bit non-standard footprints. And for the most part, these the barrels on these rifles that are on the Remington footprint either run a Remington barrel tenon or a Savage barrel tenon. So I guess we'll start with the Remington 700 long action.
This is behind you.
Yeah. So we've cleared all these weapons and all that good stuff. They're not loaded. So it's your classic Remington 700. I don't even know BDL, ADL. I don't remember.
It's ADL.
ADL. Okay.
So no hatch.
It's got a stock trigger and a hunting.
Yeah, it's 100% stock. It's actually from the 80s. It's even missing the safety stamp on the barrel. So matter of fact, I think it's from the 70s.
So a couple of things, obviously, with the Remington. The way the trigger attaches to the action is with the standard trigger pins. Mm-hmm. The threads on it are, I think it's 16 threads per inch, whereas the Savage is about 20.
Yeah, it's 16.
Yeah, so we're not going to talk too much about trigger pull or anything like that. But as far as the bolt lift, how would you say the actual bolt lift is?
The bolt lift on this is actually... It's light all the way up until the cocking mechanism kicks in, and then as you can see, there's quite a big.
So right there,
jump.
Probably last 30 degrees right there. Yeah. There's a pretty high ramp up. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then how about the throw back and forth?
The throw's good. It's more with a box magazine. You're running into the slide, so that slows it down, but it probably needs a little oil, but it's pretty good.
And then how about the close?
The close on this is actually, it's that first little engagement is pretty stiff, but after that it goes right down.
So there's a little bit of cock on close on there, but nothing too atrocious, I would say.
No.
All right, so completely stock Remington. So that's what we're going to try to compare everything to. All right, so now we're going to go over to the Savage. The Savage that I have is pretty modified. I would say most of the time, though, if you pick up a stock Savage or a stock Remington, the Remington's probably going to be a little bit smoother, and the bolt lift on the Remington's going to be a lot lighter. So this one's got a PTG bolt, PTG head. It's got the David Kiff, I believe, bolt lift kit in it, polished internals. So that you can get a Savage as light as this. Maybe even lighter with some coatings, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and do a bolt lift from the trigger, pull the trigger, and then...
Very smooth, and it falls right open, so...
Yeah. Now on this one, what we didn't cover was maybe the binding. You can get this one to bind.
Yeah, you can feel it, the bind in here, and if I overthrow it,
There's quite a bit, especially at the beginning part of the travel. Once you get it in about halfway, I think it's a little better.
yeah, here, yeah, it'll still go. It binds, but not as bad.
So a couple things about the Savage is obviously the Savage is on a barrel tenon, and typically when you buy a Savage, they're going to have the shoulder that's variable with the barrel nut. So it is technically a universal system, but some people don't feel that great about barrel nuts. So Savage footprint, which means your chassis selection is probably going to be a lot more limited than what you can get with a Remington. And so the Savages also have a floating bolt head design, which is kind of neat because it allows you to change different bolt heads. So if you want to go to a Magnum bolt face, that's pretty cool. Some people say they're more accurate, but I think all these rifles, regardless, are going to shoot about the same. I've never seen a rifle that shoots better because of a floating bolt head system versus a fixed bolt head system. All right, so we had the travel, and how about the bolt close?
The close, it's very smooth. I mean, there's hardly anything. It's the one little take up there when it starts the cock, but...
All right. That's the Savage. All right.
So the one other thing, too, on the Remington that we probably didn't point out is the bolt release on an older Remington or any standard is right above the trigger. There's a button. That means there is a metal plate that pushes another very thin piece of metal to stop the bolt. For hunting, it's good. For PRS, you're under a stressful situation, so running the bolt back and forth, you can bend that piece of metal and actually end up causing bolt bind from the bent piece of metal. The Savage is over here on the side for the bolt release. The trigger must be depressed on that one to
you know, that one's hard to get out.
Yeah, I'm not going to pull it out. I'm just saying it's over here, and again, it's similar metal size for a bolt stop.
So I will say that this Remington doesn't bind, even pushing it, and there's by far less there's bolt wobble, I guess, when the handle's all the way back. And a standard Savage will be a lot worse because the standard bolt is a lot smaller in diameter. These PTG ones are a little bit bigger in diameter, so it eats up a lot of that tolerance. But I will say, you can get this one pretty smooth in stock form.
Yeah, got that one.
All right, so next
is the SRS.
the SRS, a little bit of an oddball. So this one's in 6XC. So when we talk about footprints, this rifle is really not in an action, if you will. The barrels sit in almost like a barrel vise, like you'd see in a bench rest rifle, and then the bolt goes into the back of an extension, almost like an AR. So it's really not, it's a standalone proprietary system. It also has a floating bolt head design. I've actually snapped the connector pin in it, which makes the rifle inoperable, but Desert Tech actually sent me one out I got one back within 2 or 3 days. They're very helpful. And I don't think I've heard of anyone else snapping theirs. So I guess we'll go on to the bolt characteristics. So let's say the bolt lift. How would you say it compares?
That's a pretty heavy bolt lift.
Pretty heavy.
It's pretty heavy bolt lift, and there's a definite feel in the
notch.
in the notch in the cock.
So. Okay, and then how about the throw? Would you say the throw? Try loading or binding it. Is it pretty resistant to bind?
Yeah, it's pretty hard. Because don't these almost have a free float? How they're designed in there.
Yeah,
it's kind of a free float.
That one's not been oiled in 10 months, so.
Yeah, and it's hard to get to bind.
And then how about for the close?
The close is really easy. The close is
say
very quick. Yeah, it's
The
very
close
quick.
is equivalent to the standard Remington 700.
Oh yeah.
I would say they're about the same.
Yeah, it's that little click, that little notch, and then it goes right down.
So obviously this is a bullpup design. So the bolt being a little bit further back makes the manipulation. Let me take this.
You take that one.
A little bit awkward in the prone position. Standing is not bad, but in the prone position, when you're laid out, coming back sometimes makes it awkward. And obviously, offhand shooting requires you to move your face so the bolt can travel.
And getting the bolt out of that one.
Getting the bolt out of this one, you take off this and you hold this rifle there.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, you're not going to take the bolt out easily. It requires you to disassemble some pieces, but it's stout. You're not going to break it. This rifle is actually designed very, very robustly. There's pretty difficult to break anything on the rifle. So, any other comments on the Desert Tech?
Nope. It's weird.
It's weird.
It's cool, but weird.
All right, the Deadline Ultimatum, our Canadian brothers. So this one is in 6mm BRA. It actually feeds pretty decently. So a little bit about the action. It's in a Remington 700 footprint. Now, the way they cut these actions, I think there's a little difficulty in getting them in some MDT chassis. The ACC in particular, you have to get some shims or you have to bed the action into the chassis to get it fit perfectly, or you can do, they have some torque recommendations that they recommend, but for the most part it is a Remington 700 footprint. The tenon is a Savage barrel tenon, so the cool thing about that is obviously you can run a lot of Savage variable barrel nut barrels on there, and it does have a trigger hanger. So trigger hangers are cool because it allows you to keep your trigger in a little bracket, and if you ever needed to change your trigger, you just simply change the bracket. Some other manufacturers actually have trigger hangers with a variable distance for the firing pin engagement, and what that allows you to do, it allows you to manipulate where the firing pin engages on the trigger. So some people are really concerned with close on cock. That's the feeling when you close the bolt, you'll feel a little resistance, and the more close on cock you have, the more resistance you're going to have. And in PRS, sometimes that's a factor. So one of the ways, this is also a 60-degree bolt throw versus a 90.
Yeah, so it's not going to come up all the way. You just come up to that certain point and it stops.
So one of the give and takes for a 60-degree bolt throw is it's typically going to be stiffer, a little bit more stout than a 90-degree, because in order to get the firing pin to travel back, you have to do the same amount of effort in a shorter distance. So now Ultimatum has actually been able to limit the bolt lift, but in trade-off they shed some of that load on the close on cock. So this action is considered almost a 50-50, where 50% of the lifting force is on the bolt lift and then 50% is on the bolt close. So it does allow you to have an overall less amount of weight, but it does engage for a little bit longer. So what that translates to in the PRS world, in my opinion, is it's great for the lift, but when you're on a barricade, if you're in a position where you have to run the bolt a little slow, or you can't get completely comfortable and you're under time where you can't readjust, sometimes when you go to close the bolt, not only are you moving your reticles a little bit more, but you almost wobble the rifle sometimes. If you run it fast, you're not going to know a difference, but once in a while you'll get hung up on the very last niche of the bolt close, and sometimes it's distracting.
Has that ever caused you to tilt on a bipod or anything?
If we're on the tank traps, on the when you're on the pedestals, if you just have the game changer and you're not running it fast and you're going slow, you're going to see a little bit more wobble typically. So,
okay. Bolt lift.
So we'll go to the bolt lift.
Bolt lift. It's not bad. The bolt lift's not bad.
Try it from a fired position.
The cock on open's not bad.
Would you say it's about the same as your Remington?
Yeah, it's probably about the same.
It's about the same. Okay.
It's about the same. It's you just hit the bind a lot earlier than that. Where this comes up very easy to that cock. Then there's this stiffness that starts right off the bat.
All right. Let's try the throw.
The throw is very smooth, very slick. Binding it.
I will say it's pretty in a match. It's pretty resistant to binding. I've never had a problem with it.
Yeah,
it's most of these custom actions are. You can get them to bind if you try, but in most realistic stage scenarios, you're probably in a real bad position if you did it anyway.
Yeah.
But they're pretty difficult to bind. And how about the close?
The close. Yeah, there's the close is definitely there. What you were describing.
Right.
That cock on close. It's very stiff right off the bat to throw it down. The one thing I will say about these, just playing with it, is if you've ever done what I've done on a 90-degree throw and you have a rough textured scope, you're going to skin a thumb knuckle. This will prevent you from doing that.
Yeah, you will have a little bit more distance from the bolt handle to the scope levers, which is nice, which is a pretty good trade-off sometimes, depending on what you like. So, all right, so next we're going to go to a Defiance, which is a pretty well-known custom action. I don't want to say they're probably the most ubiquitous custom action, but they are definitely in the PRS realm prevalent for sure. Or any of your precision rifle, you're going to see these all over the place. And odds are you're probably comparing this to something else on the market. So,
this is actually my action. It is a 6mm BRA. Just like the last rifle we looked at, but it is in the Defiance. This is not stock. I've actually had the bolt DLC coated. FTW did that. Shout out to them. They also coated the action with Elite Black Cerakote. We call it DLC, but a lot of them, it's not a true DLC. It's a combination coating that they use. This one's actually called Aurora. It's pretty good. I did it before I coated the action, so it still ran on stainless steel. It didn't give me the feel that I wanted, so I ended up coating the action, and now it's pretty glass-like.
Very. So I think obviously the Defiance series are all in a Remington 700 footprint. But you can get these in a lot of flavors, different barrel tang thicknesses. You can get an extended barrel tenon, I think, for their Elites series. They have all sorts of different bolt handles you can get. You can really get them pretty nailed down to pretty close to exactly what you want.
You can't get this bolt handle from them. This is special made.
Oh, okay. So on the ejector, I think that's a pretty good upgrade from a Remington 700. Mm-hmm. I think you can get different types of ejectors. On this one, is it M16 style? Or?
Yeah, the extractor's M16 style. It's still a plunger ejector, but the extractor is M16.
So what that differs, obviously from a Remington with a Remington style extractor, but from the Savage tenon barrel actions that we had. So both the Savage and the Deadline Ultimatum use a sliding plate extractor. I don't know if one is better than the other, but I would say both of the systems are probably a little bit more reliable than a standard Remington 700 extractor. All right, so how about the bolt lift?
Bolt lift, again, you got a little bit of tension. Again, unlike the Remington 700 where you have to hit that wall coming up, this starts right off the bat, but it's very light. There's no definite hit the wall and then the cut.
So what he's talking about is this is pretty easy right here, but as I'm increasing, it's ramping up in tension until the very end.
Yeah,
whereas that looks like it's much more consistent pull weight through the entire range of travel. All right, so how about the bolt throw?
Again, it's slick. This thing's oiled up. It's my match rifle, so it stays oiled. So it goes pretty quick. Binding, again, you can get it to bind if you really try, but a match situation, you're not going to notice it.
And then the close.
The close is non-existent.
Almost disgusting. Let me try this one out. I don't get to play with this one all that much, so. It's very, very, very smooth all the way through. Yeah, it's nice. It's like it's on rails or on bearings or something. Is there any other?
The bolt release on these is a lot more robust than like the bottom of the trigger. This is a full solid block of metal. It's just spring loaded. Just push it in and it'll come out. So.
All right, so that's the Defiance.
And then I'll trade that one, and then we got.
So our last one here is a Impact 737R, and I would say it's definitely in the same price range and contention for the market anyway as the previous Defiance. Cost-wise, they're practically the same. Feature-wise, they're very, very similar in what you're going to get in both the rifles. Same level of quality. I would say the main difference, in my opinion, is there are more options with a Defiance in the way you can get the action, whereas a 737R, I believe you can get it in an AW cut. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, they're an AICS cut, and that's practically the only option.
Yeah, and the Defiance is almost opposite, where this comes in an AIC, and you have to have the option to AW. The Defiance comes AW cut. Most of them come AW cut, and you have to request an AICS only.
And you can still run an AICS in it. Does it bind when you put an AICS mag in it?
No, I've never noticed it.
Okay. On the didn't mention that on the Deadline Ultimatum, it's also compatible with AW and AICS magazines, whereas this particular 737R is only compatible with an AICS mag, which I don't have a problem with because I've got a pretty large inventory of AICS mags, and especially when you run technically it's in BRA right now.
Yeah, technically it's in BRA.
So that is one nice feature about the Impacts is Chad brought this barrel with him today just to see how it would fit on the action, and I threw a set of go, no-go gauges in, and it headspaced correctly. And that action is brand new. I think it was sitting on a rifle that was probably produced 2 or 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And they headspaced correctly, whereas I don't think the Defiances are that consistent in the head spacing, so you'd have to actually send your rifle in.
Yeah, that's one unique feature about the Impacts that surpasses all other rifles is most barrel makers or gunsmiths can cut you a barrel for an impact without ever seeing your action. My Defiance, my gunsmith, D2, Precision, great guy, he had to have my action and measure it the first time. If I called him and said, hey, cut a barrel for an impact, he could look up the blueprint and just cut one. their tolerances are exact. So you can order barrels off the shelf for them from a variety of vendors.
All right, so let's talk about the bolt lift on this guy.
Bolt lift, again, it's super constant all the way through it, just like the Defiance. There's really no defined over tension or anything.
Okay, how about the bolt throw?
Bolt throw, this is one defining moment for the impact is this thing's had, how many times you've messed with it? Because I know you haven't fired it.
I haven't actually fired it. I probably cycled it 300 times, let's call it.
And it's just nothing.
And it's expected that it'll break in a lot smoother.
Yeah, and again, trying to bind it, you can almost not bind these. They run very well in any type of environment. That's kind of where the Defiance will lack. Mine's been broken enough, and having it coated, it's great. One of my matches this year was raining bad. Mud was splashing up. Another buddy of mine that was in my squad was running a straight Defiance. It hadn't been coated. His actually bound up to the point that he got into an unsafe condition and had to step back. He ran over to his truck, got it wiped off, got it oiled up, and it ran, so he was able to continue in the match. Mine never did, but that's a risky run. But Defiance, one of the other guys in the squad's Defiance, never even gave him trouble, so they run great in all environments.
All right, and how about the bolt close on that one?
It's a defined kind of two-stage hitch, but it's not tight at all.
Right. So the other thing that the impacts have is you can put different length trigger hangers in it, whereas that Defiance has the trigger pins. Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to adjust how much cock on close was on that action, I could change it out. But I'm running a Bixen Andy Tac Sport Pro in there, and everything that I've read and feedback that I've gotten is that there's a 0 and a -1.5, and there's probably some other hangers. The 0 is probably the one you want. So the risk you run into when you shorten the distance on the trigger hanger is you get less firing pin travel, and there's always a possibility that you get insufficient ignition because you don't have enough energy with the firing pin striking the primer. So I think one worthy comparison is running the Defiance right next to the 737R, because I'm sure that's where a lot of people are looking. I wish we had a TL3, because that's also a very popular and good action, which is on a Savage tenon. But all right, so let's go ahead from a closed position. We'll run them a couple times, try to get a feel, and then we'll switch over and then talk about it. Let me switch. Oh, that one's heavy. All right, so I think on it might be the length of the bolt handle on a 737R. It feels like it might be a little bit lighter.
It probably is.
Okay. But the throw, I'll say, since that one's DLC coated and it's got fairy dust in it, that one is a little bit smoother on the travel. Granted, it's got a lot of modifications, and
a hell of a lot more rounds.
And a lot more rounds. Now this 737R does have a little bit of a notch that he was describing, where I don't think that really exists. Yeah, on his Defiance. Has it always been that way, you think, or was that?
No, it probably hasn't. It's probably come with time, just from breaking it in. But it's
I will say though, once you getting past that notch, especially when you're running in a match, I don't think you'd feel, and I would expect that this rifle breaks in just fine. So, all right, I think that's the end of our comparisons. So hopefully we've been able to give you guys a good idea of how the different